I have an incredible privilege, and that is to introduce our featured speaker for the evening. Katy Faust is founder and president of Them Before Us, a global movement defending children's rights to their mother and father. She publishes, speaks, and testifies widely on why marriage and family are matters of justice for children. In fact, Katy was supposed to be in Guatemala this week at a global forum to hammer out an international declaration on the importance of the family. Fortunately for us, that meeting got postponed until later in the year. So now Katy was able to be with us, and we couldn't be more excited. Katy's articles have appeared in Newsweek, USA Today, The Federalist, Public Discourse, World Magazine, The Daily Signal, The Washington Examiner, The American Mind, and about everywhere that you'll find when you turn around. She's very widely published and sought after. She's also on the advisory board for the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. Katy also helped design the teen edition of Canavox, which studies sex, marriage, and relationships from a natural law perspective. She detailed her philosophy of worldview transmission in her book, Raising Conservative Kids in a Woke City. She's also the co-author of her namesake book, Them Before Us. Katy and her pastor husband, Ryan, are raising their 4 children, and they live in Seattle. So friends, please help me welcome Katy Faust.
Hi. Thanks. Thank you. Great to be with you. It's a great introduction. John, you're hired. You can do all my introductions from now on. The best part about speaking with you tonight is that I'm not at the table with my chocolate pie. I needed a little bit of social distancing from that fantastic dessert, but it's really wonderful to be here with you, especially because I got to say the Pledge of Allegiance for the first time, and since I was a 3rd grader, because we don't do that on the West Coast anymore, apparently. And also because I got to hear the words Republican and majority in the same sentence, which was fantastic. Yeah, so good work on that. So I am the founder and the president of Them Before Us. It is a children's rights movement that seeks to prioritize children in all matters of marriage and family. We don't look at marriage as primarily a matter of religious liberty or primarily a vehicle of adult fulfillment. We look at marriage and family as what it truly is, a matter of justice for children. We see it, honestly, as an area where we must protect kids. And we do that, coincidentally, not coincidentally, by abiding by God's design for sex and marriage. Because that's how it works, right? God says something, and he says it for a reason. So we are, I like to say, the most influential nonprofit you've never heard of. We just yesterday signed a contract with Focus on the Family for a $1 million documentary. We do a lot of work with the Colson Center Heritage Foundation. I'm on global organizations working to shut down big fertility and the way that buys and sells and commodifies children. We are busy traveling quite a bit. I've got my 3rd book coming out in September called Pro-Child Politics, where I've conscripted national leaders who are going to take our child-centric message of put children before adults and apply it to every major political issue, from immigration to ESG, to policing, to debt, to energy, to the environment. What would it look like if we prioritized children in every major area of politics? And I conscripted some of the biggest names to help me. The president of Promise Keepers to write our chapter on masculinity, Abby Johnson of Unplanned fame to write my chapter on life and why life matters, co-founder of Moms for Liberty, Tiffany Justice, to write our education chapter. So we've tapped the top people across all of these different sectors to use our rubric of talking about why everything that's happening in culture today should be viewed as a matter of child protection. And 12 years ago, I wasn't doing any of this. I was not unaware of politics, but I was unengaged in politics. My husband had just moved to Seattle to be the senior pastor of our church. We had just gotten home from China after adopting our youngest child, and I was tired and busy. And I really thought, well, politics, running for office, political engagement, that's for somebody else to do. That's not my job. I'm just a pastor's wife. I'm just a mom. And really, not my business. Somebody else can do it. But it was very soon after President Obama evolved on the topic of gay marriage, because you may remember when he ran for office in 2008 and 2012, he was pro-traditional marriage. But after he got his second term secured, he evolved on marriage and decided, actually now I'm for gay marriage. And I noticed a sea change in all of media, and even among my friend groups, that now that the president was on board, we can now cast anybody who rejects gay marriage as ignorant, hateful, religious nut, bigoted homophobes. And that is a problem, because I am a supporter of traditional marriage. Why? Because my husband and I have been working with kids at that point for, about 15 years, and I understood that marriage was actually the building block of society, and it was really, really important. And further, just like most of you, I have LGBT family and friends who I love. I don't hate them. I'm not afraid of them. I don't reject them. And my personal story is my parents were married until I was 10, and then they divorced. And then my father dated and remarried. And my mom repartnered with another woman. So my mom has been in a same-sex relationship since I was in elementary school. And I've grown up with both of them. And I love them both. And just like you, who are in relationship with love, seek to serve without affirming your LGBT family and friends, you understand that you can both love people that disagree with you and hold fast to what the Bible says about sex and marriage. In fact, I would say, if you're a biblical Christian, you don't get to choose. You can't do one or the other. You have to do both. So I was a little incensed by this accusation that it was only bigotry that could be driving people to support traditional marriage. But the real thing that got me was what I then saw was the promotion of same-sex households in service of gay marriage. The promotion of two moms or two dads, saying, look, these kids love it. There's no difference between kids who have two moms and two dads versus kids who are raised by their mom and dad. And that's where I said, now you've crossed a line. Because what they're really saying is, if a child has two moms, what that means is they have lost their dad. And if you see a picture of a child with two dads, what that means is they have lost their mom. Now, you've been around kids. You've probably been a kid at some... Raise your hand. Anybody been a kid at some point in their life? Yes. So here's the thing about kids. They care about whether or not their mother and their father loves them, knows them, and is in their life. And they actually care about whether or not their mother loves their father and their father loves their mother. In fact, if you could have a kid here, right in front of you, speaking from the stage today, if you were to ask them what they really care about, if they were totally honest, one of the things that they would say is, I want my mom to love me, and I want my dad to love me, and I want my mom to love my dad, and I want my dad to love my mom. It is so ingrained, it is so absolutely fundamental to the human experience that that's naturally what children want. Sometimes they don't get it because of tragedy, right? We as a species have had a lot of experience with mother and father loss due to tragedy. But that's not what the gay lobby was pushing. They were not pushing restoration after a tragic loss. They were pushing optional and intentionally absent mothers and fathers in the name of progress. And they were lying about kids to do it. So that is when I said, get behind me, Satan. Now we roll. Right? That was enough to get me off the bench. It wasn't necessarily that there were threats to religious liberty, which there are. It wasn't necessarily that there was accusations and name-calling, which there was. It was because they came for the kids. It is because they said, we are going to victimize kids to advance our political agenda. So that is what finally got me engaged. That's what finally got me off the couch and, at first, onto my keyboard. Because I started an anonymous blog, because that's what everybody was doing in the, from 2000 to 2015. So I was writing an anonymous blog. And why was it anonymous, you ask? Because I am a chicken. because I know what these people will do to you, right? I know how they will try to ruin your life and find your family and get you fired and all of that. And so I wasn't ready to be like public out there, but I was ready to be a little keyboard warrior behind my anonymous, persona. And so I did that for a couple years, and it was actually a mercy because I was writing about why marriage is a matter of justice for children. Why is it? It's because it's the only relationship that unites the two people to whom children have a natural right. That's why. And if you can give children and defend that fundamental natural right, you know what else you get? You get social justice. If you can protect that individual justice for children, their right to life, and then their right to their mother and father, you actually decimate every other social ill that we're facing today. You nearly wipe out child poverty, teen homelessness, teen suicides, high school dropout rates, teen pregnancies, and high incarceration rates. Why? Why is that? Why is that if you can defend children's rights to their mother and father, that you actually nearly wipe out all those other social ills that one political party is seeking to spend hundreds of billions of dollars a year to fund? Why? It's because all of those issues are overpopulated with fatherless children, right? 90% of teens on the street had no father in their home. Children are 4 times more likely to grow up in poverty when they don't have a dad. 63% of teen pregnancies are from fatherless homes. 71% of teen suicides are kids that didn't have a dad growing up. And that's not to say that if you don't have a dad, you're doomed, but you are a fool to think that there are not more stumbling blocks and roadblocks to success when he's gone. So that's why marriage is a matter of justice for children, because it brings the two people into their life who are statistically the most connected to, invested in, and protective of them. So I got to work all that out, figure it out, do some research, understand where the holes were in my argument as an anonymous blogger, which was great, because I had a lot to learn. And then a very powerful and well-known gay blogger with a huge following back-searched one of my pictures and found the IP address that I was blogging from, which was connected to my husband's church. And he doxed, not me, but he published all the names and addresses of all the home community leaders at our church to try to get me to stop. And I'll tell you what, well, there's 2 kinds of Christians. Okay, tell me which one you are, okay? So one kind of Christian is the truth teller Christian, right? Where you hear something and you're like, that is not right, and I'm gonna say something, I know all the Bible verses and the reasons why, and I'm just gonna speak up and say it. So that's one kind of Christian. The other kind of Christian is the grace-giving Christian, right? The one that says, well, I just wanna take care of people and have them in my home. I wanna welcome them in. If there's a problem, I'm just gonna love them right into the kingdom, right? So, which one are you? Raise your hand if you're a truth teller. Don't be shy. We got some truth tellers out there. And the truth tellers are actually lying right now. Some of you truth tellers need to put your hand up. How many of you guys are grace givers? Where you err a little more on the side of like, I'm just gonna maintain the relationship? Yeah, good. So, I'm the grace giver. I don't like conflict, and I don't like confrontation. So God had to do a big work in me just to like keyboard warrior under a pseudonym. But when they came for the people of my church, I will tell you, I just said, all right, I'll stop. Because that's what he said, I'll take the names down if you stop blogging. Because at that point I had a bit of a following. And so he almost got me. Because I'm like, I mean, you can sometimes handle people saying mean things to you, but when they come for your family or your kids or your friends or your church members, like it kind of gets you by the throat and you go, all right, I'll stop. But the good men, the elders of my church, one of which is incredibly good looking and looks fantastic in a Navy uniform, all these good men at my church said, no, I don't think so. I don't think you stop at all. I think you go big. And I was like, all right. So it was very much a what the enemy means for evil kind of situation, right? He intended to silence me, but what he did by removing my anonymity was, I'm like, well, now I write under my own name. Now I can submit amicus briefs to the Supreme Court. Now I can travel to Australia and Thailand and South Korea and Albania and the Czech Republic, and I can defend children there. Now I can run workshops at the United Nations. Now I can start a nonprofit that seeks to, Mom, I'll get back to you. Talk to you later, Mom. Now I can actually formally advocate for children in the cultural space and in the courtroom. So that's how this got started. A woman who just got angry. People are like, how did you get into this? And I'm like, I snapped. One day I just totally snapped, because they came for the kids. So what I want to talk with you about tonight is that ultimately every major culture war issue that we're facing today, all of the issues that John just talked about, all the different policy issues that they are dealing with have something in common. And it is that when you get those questions wrong, children are the victims. That is what all these different issues today have in common. We are either, in all of these questions, going to protect children, or we are going to victimize children. And as I've gone around the country, around the internet, publishing, speaking, interviewing, creating content, I think that it's the most accurate to talk about children being victimized in 4 distinct ways. Children's rights and well-being are being threatened in 4 different areas. And so it's helpful to think of it like this. We need to protect children's life, family, mind, and body. Life, family, mind, and body. Because these critical child rights, areas of child protection, can all be boiled down to needing to protect their life, family, mind, and body. So where are children's life? Where's their life at risk? Where's their life being threatened? Well, obviously, many of you guys have been fighting to defend children's right to life for decades. Right? Abortion has been one of the greatest destroyers and threats to children's rights for nearly 50 years. And I think we've made some incredible gains on the right to life issue because we have focused on the humanity of the child. We have cared for the mother and the community and the person that's struggling with the unplanned pregnancy or the difficult diagnosis. But we've said, regardless of how you, the woman, are feeling or afraid or your plans, you cannot victimize a child by sacrificing their right to life. And that's good. And you can see the North Carolina Family Institute, Policy Institute, doing incredible work to defend children's right to life. But there's another front on the battle to defend children's right to life. And it's not the baby-taking industry of abortion. It's the baby-making industry of big fertility. Now, this has been in the headlines a lot, and unfortunately, there is a bit of a confusion, even among the right, when it comes to big fertility, specifically IVF. IVF just means making babies in a petri dish. That's what IVF is. Taking the reproductive process out of the natural union and having that conception presided over by a technician rather than a child's creator. Now, the problem with this, I would say, is not primarily the technical process. The problem is that big fertility, specifically IVF, destroys more embryonic life every year than Planned Parenthood. If you want to defend children's right to life, you must recognize that when it comes to the destroying of embryos, the victimization of children, big fertility does that in numbers that far outpace abortion. When you talk about little lives created in petri dishes, when you look at the numbers that we are able to get from big fertility, which doesn't like to track or share what they're doing behind their clinic doors, what you see is only about 2 to 7% of lab-created babies will be born alive. The vast majority are going to be donated to research, discarded because they were not the right fitness, discarded because they were the wrong sex, had the wrong hair color, the wrong eye color, because they were perhaps had a disability. I saw in one of your articles, your newsletters over there, that you talk about the false positives of the widely used genetic screening in IVF and regular pregnancies, but also IVF pregnancies before the baby even makes it into the womb. Some of these kids won't survive the thaw or the transfer. Some of them will be selectively reduced, especially if they're in a surrogate pregnancy. And selective reduction is just sanitized speak for targeted abortions between 12 and 20 months. So when it comes to children's life, we must continue to fight for children's life. But we have to recognize that both the baby-making and baby-taking industry need our scrutiny. What about children's family? We need to protect their life and their family. Well, that is sort of the them before us lane, right? That is the area where we do most of our focus, where children have a right to be known and loved by both their mother and father. And that matters when you're talking about divorce, when you're talking about critiquing modern families, when you're talking about reproductive technologies which not only victimize children's right to life, but also commercially separate them from one or both parents very often at the moment of conception. And these kids struggle. Like, if you grew up without your mother or father, you're not only susceptible to all those social ills that I mentioned before, but many of these kids struggle with deep identity questions and identity issues. It's very hard for these kids to answer the question, who am I? If they can't answer the question, whose am I? And that's what's happening in culture, law, and technology right now. We are in essence saying children don't have a right to their own mother and father. Functionally, we are treating them through the cooperation of big fertility and the redefinition of marriage and the cultural mantras of things like love makes a family. We've functionally reduced children to the status of accessories. Now children can be cut and pasted into any and every adult relationship, whether or not, that person is related to them. And these days with big fertility, whether or not that person has gone through any kind of background check or screening or vetting. I mean, are any of you guys on Twitter? Okay, my gosh, I really have got to get off Twitter. I mean, if you guys aren't there, but I'm on Twitter way too much, kind of need an intervention. But there's been a couple viral stories recently of people who have acquired children through reproductive technologies that very clearly have cut the child off from their mother or their father through surrogacy or sperm donation. And it's we've had a couple stories recently of pedophiles who have acquired children through surrogacy because they were able to put together sperm, egg, and womb and walk out with a baby that's totally unrelated. Now, these are men that never would have passed an adoption background check, right? Adoptive parents like me and like many of you understand that just because you want a baby, that doesn't mean that you get a baby placed with you, right? But adoption, before I was a mom, I was the assistant director at the largest Chinese adoption agency in the world. Adoption, when it's properly understood, is a critical institution that society uses to mend the wounds of children who have lost their parents. Big fertility functions as a marketplace for adults to deliver customized child products to them without any kind of screening or vetting or background checks. So there's all kinds of areas where we need to defend children's family, their right to their mother and father. And the truth is, there's not a lot of sectors right now that are doing anything to get that right when it comes to kids. Children also have a right to innocence. We need to protect their minds. There are some forces on the left that really just see children as miniature adults, right, with the same level of capacity and reasoning and decision-making ability as people who are 18 or 25 or 35. And so they think, well, we can talk with them about adult-level topics. We can saddle them with mature content, and it's no big deal. In fact, it's good for them, right, to be exposed to very sexual content at very young ages. Now, of course, that defies everything that we know about child psychology. It's the reason why we have a rating system for movies, right, to say G, general, everybody in, R, no. Because we recognize that there's some content that little kids shouldn't be able to see. But now we have an entire wing of, the political machine that says, actually, we should expose children, young children, to a lot of graphic and sexual content. And we shouldn't limit pornography or do anything to fight pornography because this is really a free speech issue. No big deal. So we have to fight for the ability to protect children's minds. And one of the ways to do that is put the power in parents' hands when it comes to where to educate them. And if the school is victimizing children and violating their innocence through sex ed curriculum that enables damaging ideologies to be smuggled in the name of curriculum, then parents should be able to move their kids out, right? So we have to protect children's minds. Children also have a right to an intact body that is unmedicalized. And it's amazing that we have to say this, that we have to say, actually, you shouldn't be able to sterilize children using off-label hormones that supposedly block their puberty and will render them infertile. You shouldn't be able to do that. Children's bodies need to be protected, right? From doctors, from activists, sometimes from their own teacher or school counselors who are going to funnel them into a pipeline that will turn them into permanent customers of pharmaceuticals and cosmetic surgery. Children's bodies need to be protected. So those are the four main areas where children are being victimized today. And children's rights demand that we protect them. That is the job of ordinary adults, is to protect kids. And those are the four areas where children are under attack: life, family, mind, and body. You'll notice that as John was talking about everything going on with his organization in this state, they've hit them all. They've hit them all. They have seen the threat to kids in these four areas and done something about it, right? From their efforts to reduce the age of abortion, to putting more control in the hands of parents so they can protect children's minds, to keeping doctors' hands off of kids who are gender confused, and to their families, right? Strengthening the relationship with parental rights to their own children. So honestly, I work with a lot of family policy councils across the country. Not everybody has something like this. There's a lot of states where you will see a bill come through to make parenthood laws gender neutral, and we'll go, where's the family council on the ground? And sometimes the answer is, there isn't one. And sometimes the answer is, they're not interested. So you guys are really fortunate, very fortunate, to have somebody that is right and fully engaged and highly competent. So welcome to the powerhouse of North Carolina. So we've just talked about a lot of issues that are very often framed as political, right? Well, those are political issues. Those are things you need to lobby about. Those are things you need to take to your congressman or your senator. And sometimes you're going to hear people say, well, you need to stay out of politics. That's politics. You should stay out of it. But the reality is, this is not politics. This is child protection. Everything that we have talked about tonight is not a matter of politics. It is a matter of child protection. And you'll hear some voices and some forces say, hey, Christians, stay out. Don't bring your politics into our questions, into our legislature, into the voting booth. But the answer for Christians is, we are all about child protection. Okay, that is and always has been the pattern for true Christianity everywhere that it's gone. So I just want to sort of take us back, right, to the first century, where we would say, okay, well, those guys, they weren't political. I mean, they were just going house to house sharing the gospel, right? Like, that's what we see in Acts, is they're not engaging, they're not voting, they're not running for office. But I'll tell you what happened when the first century church emerged on the scene. First century church was born into a world where child victimization was rampant. Rampant. There was widespread abortion. Not only was there abortion, but there was a widespread practice of something called exposure, where when a child was born, if they were weak, female, small, disabled, the child would be exposed, which meant just thrown out somewhere, and then exposed to the elements, to wild animals, to thirst and to hunger, and they would die. And that was widespread. And who decided whether or not the child was exposed? It was the powerful, namely the free land-holding male of the household. So it was the male household, and I don't want to say the father, because he got to decide this about the servants and the slaves too, right? The man in charge of the home got to decide who lived and who died, who was aborted, who was exposed, who was kept. But this was widely practiced. And you've probably heard that Christians responded to this by fishing children out of rivers and stationing lactating women in prominent places so you could bring those children that were rescued from exposure to a woman who could immediately feed the baby. So exposure was widespread. Children were also sold, sometimes temporarily to pay off family debts, sometimes permanently, and very often, of course, that meant going into a slave trade, a sex trafficking situation. There was high levels of sexualization by adult men, that children, especially children of the household, were considered objects to be used by the powerful men in the home. And so that was just widespread and not really even questioned. There wasn't a lot of, eye-batting about that. That was just how it was. They would also surgically mutilate their children. Some boys especially were used as eunuchs in strong, powerful, wealthy homes, and so they would be surgically mutilated so that they would not pose a threat as they grew up in that home to the women in the house. So that is what the first century world was like when Christianity was born. Why was it like that? It's because they did not have a child dignifying or even a human dignifying view of the human person and therefore the human child. In that Roman world, in that worldview, children were not seen as fully human until they could walk and talk. And so, of course, you can victimize something that is not fully human, right? If it's not really a person, you can kind of do whatever you want with it. So they did. Who determined the rights of the child? Who determined what happened to them? The powerful of society. And if you had power or money or stature, you got to decide whether or not the child was protected or victimized. Christians came into the world and did something different. They didn't abort their kids. They birthed their kids. They didn't sell their children, right? They kept their children. They didn't expose their infants. They rescued exposed infants. They did not create unwanted children through adultery, premarital sex, extramarital sex, because they were required to only have their sexual needs met within the marriage. And so there weren't a lot of unwanted children. And they kept their disabled babies too. They didn't expose their disabled babies. Why was it like that? Why were Christians so different? It's because they had a Savior who was born as an infant. The God they worshiped had made himself like those vulnerable children that were being exploited and victimized and mutilated and sexualized. And then that Savior grew up, and the Savior said, "Bring those little kids to me. Let those little children come to me." He valued even little children. He dignified, humanized these little children. And then he said crazy things like, "Do you want to enter the kingdom of God? You have to become like little children." And he also said, "If you hurt little children, I have devised a system of cruel and unusual punishment, and you'll have to deal with me. If you cause one of these little ones to stumble, it'd be better for you to have a millstone tied around your neck and thrown into a river." So Christians had a very different idea about who children are, what they deserved, and how we needed to respond to them. It was so different, the way Christians interacted with children in the 1st and 2nd and 3rd century, it was so different from the Roman world that they were born into that some sociologists actually posit that Christians invented childhood. Christians invented childhood because they treated children in such a different way, in a way that eradicated the slave trade of children and rejected the mutilation of children, rejected the killing of children, the sexualization of children, the exploitation of children. And you'll see that wherever Christianity has gone, the status of children has been elevated. This is a natural part of Christianity and where it has gone and what it has always done. So what are we facing today? What's going on in our culture today? Well, as Christianity has receded in terms of its dominance and its prominence in areas of culture, in areas of policy, in law, what we see is really the repaganization of society. We are seeing all of those first century violations of the rights of children reemerging in old and new ways. So we see abortion, right? Which is now we're finding new ways to abort children, not just surgically, but chemically, and now through the mail, if needed. Exposure's coming back. I mean, February of this year, I think the Dutch law went into place that you can now assist the suicide of children under 12 who have a medical issue or who are suffering from autism. I mean, so killing already born children is coming back. The sexualization of children by adult men. Where have you seen that recently? In every drag queen story hour? I mean, that's what it is. You've got grown men who are sexualizing children at libraries, in elementary schools. And they're not doing it because it's good for the kids. They're doing it because it's good for them. So we're seeing the sexualization of children at a young age. I don't know if you know this, but in addition to transgender surgeries, which is surgical mutilation, irreplaceable, non-binary surgeries, we've actually created, the LGBTQ lobby has created a new sexual orientation called the eunuch. So we're bringing back eunuchs today and all of the surgical procedures that we rejected, outlawed as child cruelty in the 1st and 2nd and 3rd centuries. There are still, back in the 1st century, we've done some excavation in different areas in the first couple centuries, not just in the Roman world, but actually all across Europe. And they used to find these mass graves that were filled with infants. And they couldn't figure out why they were all there. And they realized, oh, that's the location of a brothel. So they could identify where the brothels were because of the mass graves of infants. So today we also have mass graves of very small humans. And it honestly is the storage facilities at a lot of IVF clinics. We've got 1.5 million embryos on ice. Many of them have been functionally abandoned and are never going to see the light of day. They are going to be suspended in frozen storage forever until we figure out what to do with what is arguably a humanitarian crisis. So because we have forsaken a child-dignifying view, a Christian view of the human child, and our obligation to protect them, we are seeing all of these old threats to children return. So what do we need to do about this? We need to return to historical Christianity. That's what we need. We need Christians to rediscover one of the original manifestations of our true and undefiled religion before God. We need to go back and care for the most vulnerable, both the bookends of widows, orphans, the elderly, and the very, very young. But it's especially children that need our protection. And I'm going to make a case that we are the only ones that can do it. Christians are the only ones that can do it. Why? Because we have the only worldview that says not only are these children from the moment of conception made in the image of God and deserve protection and dignity that goes along with that, but also it takes courage to fight for children today. Like if you say, I am pro-life, or if you say kids actually need their mother and father, if you say, I don't agree with gay marriage, if you say, I don't think that you should transition that child, if you say, hey, parents should be able to pull their kids out of school, there's a really good chance that the mob will come for you. They'll come for your job. You'll probably lose friends. Your family might turn against you. These days, there's a very high cost for speaking up on behalf of children. Child protection is going to cost you, socially, relationally, maybe vocationally. But here's the thing about Christians. We fear something more than the mob. That's why it is going to be Christians who lead the movement for child protection. Because honestly, the mob is fearsome. Like, I have faced the mob, and they crazy. right? They will try to hurt you and your family and your church. They'll try to come for your job. They will. Like, it's high risk, and it's fearsome. The only solution is to fear something more than the mob. That's the only solution forward. If you really want to protect kids, you have to fear something more than the people around you. And that someone is the God who charges us all with child protection. We fear him, we do what he says, and sometimes there's a cost. But it is a cost that will be rewarded by the God who says, I hold the whole thing in my hand. You can trust me with this. So, not everybody is going to start a nonprofit, or a blog, or a podcast, or run for office, or be hired by NC Family. But all of us are required to get in on child protection in some way. So think about it. How do you want to do it? Because you can figure out how you want to get involved in child protection, but if you're a Christian, you don't get to decide whether or not to be involved in child protection. If you are a follower of Christ, the answer is, I will. Here I am. Send me. Thank you so much.